The sound of my daughter's voice still echoes in my mind. Dad, you'll either bow down to my husband or pack your bags and get out. But instead of the tears she expected, I simply smiled, grabbed my suitcase, and walked away from the house that bore my sweat, my sacrifices, and my dreams. She thought I'd come crawling back within days, broken and apologetic. 3 weeks later, my phone showed 47 missed calls. That was only the beginning of what I had planned. They were about to discover that respect isn't negotiable, and dignity has a price they couldn't afford to pay. Before we dive into this story that will change how you think about family boundaries forever, smash that subscribe button and let me know in the comments where you're watching from, because what happened next will shock you. The grocery bags felt heavier than usual as I shouldered through my front door that Saturday afternoon. Spring sunlight filtered through the lace curtains Martha had hung before the cancer stole her from me, casting dancing shadows across the hardwood floors we'd refinished together during happier times. But today, that familiar warmth couldn't penetrate the ice forming in my chest. There he was, Harry, my son-in-law, sprawled across Martha's favorite leather recliner like he owned the place. His dirty socks were propped up on the ottoman, an empty beer bottle dangling from his fingers like a cigarette. The TV remote balanced on his stomach as if it were his throne's scepter. "Grab me another cold one while you're up, old man," he grunted, without even glancing away from the basketball game. The casual dismissal in his voice made my jaw clench. I set the bags down slowly, feeling the plastic handles burn red welts into my palms. "Excuse me?" "You heard me." His eyes never left the screen. "Make it a Corona this time, not that cheap garbage you usually drink." The irony burned like acid. I'd bought those Coronas specifically for him, spending money from my meager Social Security check on beer I'd never touch. "Harry, I just walked through the door. I need to put these groceries away." Finally, he looked at me. That look, the same condescending expression I'd seen creep across his face more frequently over the past year. The look that said I was nothing more than an inconvenience in his world. "What's the big deal? You're already standing up. I'm comfortable." He gestured dismissively with the empty bottle. "Besides, this is our house now. Time you started acting like it." The words hit me like a physical blow. Our house. The house I'd bought with Martha 30 years ago. The house where I'd carried her over the threshold. The house where I'd rocked our baby daughter to sleep. The house I'd nearly lost when the medical bills piled up, but fought to keep because it was our family's anchor. "This is my house, Harry." He stood up slowly, using his 6-foot frame like a weapon against my 70-year-old body. "Funny, because your daughter and I pay the bills around here with my paycheck. We make the decisions." He stepped closer, beer breath washing over me. "You want to keep living here peacefully? Then you learn your place. Simple as that." The kitchen door swung open and Tiffany appeared like she'd been waiting in the wings. Her blonde hair was pulled back in that messy ponytail she wore when she was stressed, a dish towel twisted between her hands like she was wringing someone's neck. "What's all the shouting about?" But her tone suggested she already knew. "Your old man's being difficult again," Harry said, never taking his eyes off me. "Asked him to grab me a beer, and he's throwing some kind of tantrum about it." Tiffany looked at me with that expression I'd learned to dread, disappointment mixed with exasperation, like I was a child misbehaving at a grocery store. "Dad, seriously? Just get him the beer. It's not worth fighting over." But Harry wasn't finished establishing his dominance. He moved closer, close enough that I could see the red veins in his eyes, smell the stale alcohol and entitlement that seemed to ooze from his pores. "Here's how this works, Clark." His voice dropped to a threatening whisper. "You live in our house, you eat our food. That means when I tell you to do something, you do it. No questions. No attitude. No disrespect. Our house. Our food." The lies were so casual, so confident, that for a moment I wondered if I was losing my mind. Had I somehow forgotten that I'd been supporting them financially for 5 years? Had I imagined paying their mortgage, their utilities, their insurance, their groceries? Tiffany stepped beside her husband, presenting a united front that felt like a knife between my ribs. Dad, you need to make a decision right now. Either you help out around here and do what Harry asks, or you can pack your things and find somewhere else to live. The ultimatum hung in the air like smoke from a house fire. I looked at my daughter, really looked at her, searching for any trace of the little girl who used to crawl into my lap during thunderstorms, who used to pick dandelions and call them beautiful flowers for Daddy. All I saw was a stranger wearing her face. "All right," I said quietly. Harry's chest puffed out with victory. "Good. Now about that beer. I'll pack." The words dropped into the silence like stones into still water. Harry's smirk died on his lips. Tiffany's mouth fell open slightly, like she'd been expecting me to crumble, to apologize, to shuffle off to the kitchen like a beaten dog. Instead, I turned toward the hallway, my footsteps steady on the hardwood floor that Martha and I had chosen together, board by board, 20 years ago. The suitcase came down from the closet shelf with a soft thump that seemed to echo through the bedroom like a gunshot. Martha's favorite, the one we'd bought for our honeymoon to Yellowstone when the world was young and full of possibilities. Now it gaped open on our bed like a hungry mouth, ready to swallow what remained of my life in this house. I packed methodically, muscle memory taking over where my heart couldn't. Underwear, socks, enough clothes for a week. The framed photo of Martha went into the side pocket, wrapped carefully in tissue paper. My medications, reading glasses, the small leather journal where I tracked every penny I'd spent on their behalf for 5 years. From the living room came the urgent whisper of crisis management. Harry's voice rising and falling like an angry tide, Tiffany's softer responses barely audible through the walls. They were figuring out what to do, how to handle the old man's unexpected rebellion. But I wasn't rebelling. I was simply accepting their terms. When I wheeled the suitcase down the hallway, they stopped talking. Harry had returned to his throne, but his posture was different now, alert, watchful. Tiffany stood frozen by the kitchen doorway, arms crossed defensively, trying to look stern but failing to hide her uncertainty. Neither of them said goodbye. The car started on the first try, my reliable old Buick, one of the few things in my life that never let me down. I backed out of the driveway without looking at the house, without checking to see if they were watching from the window. The 30-minute drive to Pine Lodge Motel gave me time to think, to let the memories wash over me like waves against a seawall. Tiffany's college tuition, $40,000 a year for that fancy private school she'd insisted on. I'd worked double shifts at the bank for 4 straight years, taking on extra clients, staying late to review loan applications until my eyes burned and my hands cramped from signing documents. Her wedding, $25,000 when Harry's family couldn't afford their share. I'd covered it quietly, not wanting to embarrass anyone. The reception hall, the flowers, her dress, everything had to be perfect for my little girl's special day. The house, $80,000 from my retirement savings for their down payment because young couples need help getting started. That's what fathers do, I'd told myself. That's what Martha would have wanted. Then came the monthly payments that followed like clockwork. $200 for their mortgage, $300 for utilities, $500 for groceries when money got tight. My Social Security check disappeared into their lives piece by piece, and I'd convinced myself it was love. Pine Lodge Motel sat on the outskirts of Kalispell like a forgotten memory, its neon sign flickering intermittently in the growing dusk. The room was small but clean, a bed, a chair, a tiny table by the window. I set my suitcase on the luggage rack and sat heavily on the mattress edge, feeling every one of my 70 years settling into my bones. The silence was different here, not the comfortable quiet of my own home, but the hollow emptiness of a place where nobody belonged to anybody. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts, bank numbers, insurance companies, credit card services, numbers I knew by heart from 30 years in finance. Tomorrow was Sunday, but some things could be done. Some calls could be made. I opened my laptop on the small table and logged into my online banking. Account balances glowed on the screen like accusatory eyes: checking, savings, retirement accounts. Numbers that represented a lifetime of careful planning, of denying myself small luxuries so I could take care of my family. The cursor blinked in the payment section, waiting for me to decide what came next. Sunday morning arrived gray and overcast, matching the weight in my chest perfectly. I spread my paperwork across the motel table like a general planning a campaign. Bank statements, insurance policies, legal documents. Everything organized, everything within reach. The first call went to First National Bank. "Good morning, Mr. Miller," the automated system chirped after I navigated the phone tree. "How can I help you today?" "I need to cancel the automatic mortgage payment for 847 Pine Street, account ending in 4729. A pause, computer keys clicking in the distance. "Sir, this payment has been active for 5 years. Are you certain you want to discontinue it?" "Completely certain." "May I ask the reason for the change?" My fingers tightened around the phone. "The homeowners no longer qualify for my financial assistance." More clicking. "Very well, Mr. Miller. The automatic payment will be canceled effective immediately. You should receive written confirmation within 3 business days." The second call was to Geico. 3 years of insuring both their cars on my policy: Harry's oversized Silverado, Tiffany's Honda. $280 every month for vehicles I never drove, coverage for accidents I'd never cause. "I need to remove 2 vehicles from my policy," I told the agent. "My daughter and son-in-law will need to establish their own coverage." "When would you like this change to take effect?" "Today." The credit cards took longer. Tiffany was an authorized user on 3 of my accounts: Visa, MasterCard, and the Costco store card. $500 every month I'd been paying on balances I'd never created, purchases I'd never made. "Mr. Miller," the Visa representative explained, "removing authorized users will require them to apply for their own credit. Any outstanding balances will remain your responsibility, but they won't be able to make new charges." "I understand. Remove them immediately." Each call felt like lifting a weight from my shoulders. 30 years of banking experience had taught me the system's ins and outs, the legal language, the proper procedures. Everything I was doing was completely within my rights. By noon, I'd made 9 calls. Mortgage payments stopped, insurance canceled, credit cards blocked, the automatic transfers that had been bleeding my accounts dry for years. All of it ended with polite conversations and confirmation numbers. I sat back in the cheap motel chair and looked at my notes. Confirmation numbers, reference codes, effective dates, the paper trail of financial independence. My phone sat silent on the table. No missed calls, no urgent messages. They didn't know yet. Probably wouldn't know until the first payment bounced. The first bill arrived with their names on it instead of mine. But they would know soon enough. The week passed quietly for me, but apparently not for them. I'd settled into a routine at Pine Lodge: coffee from the lobby, breakfast at the diner down the street, long walks around Kalispell's tree-lined neighborhoods where nobody knew my story yet. My phone accumulated missed calls like a disease I had no interest in curing. By Wednesday, there were 15 messages. By Friday, 31. I listened to them in chronological order, watching the progression from confusion to anger to desperation, like a documentary about the stages of grief. The first few were almost casual. Tiffany asking if there was some kind of banking error with the mortgage payment. Harry leaving brief, annoyed messages about the car insurance lapsing. But by midweek, panic had crept in like smoke under a door. "Dad, what the hell is going on?" Tiffany's voice cracked with frustration. "The bank says you stopped the automatic payment. They want the full amount by Friday or they'll start foreclosure proceedings." Harry's messages grew increasingly aggressive. "Clark, you need to fix this right now. I've got people asking questions about my insurance. You're making us look like deadbeats." The later calls bordered on begging. Tiffany crying, promising they'd work something out if I just called them back. Harry trying a different approach, claiming he'd been too harsh and wanted to make things right. I deleted each message after listening, feeling nothing but mild curiosity about their growing desperation. Thursday morning brought a knock at my motel room door. Through the peephole I saw them both, Tiffany in a wrinkled sweater, Harry in his work clothes, both looking like they'd slept badly. I opened the door but didn't invite them in. Dad. Tiffany's eyes were red-rimmed, her usual composure completely shattered. We need to talk. About what? Harry pushed forward, his face flushed with the kind of anger that comes from fear. About the fact that you're trying to destroy our lives over some stupid argument about beer. I'm not trying to destroy anything, I said calmly. I'm simply no longer paying for your lives. The mortgage, Clark. Harry's voice rose dangerously. You can't just stop paying the mortgage, that's our home. Actually, it's my home. My name on the deed, my signature on the loan. You two were just guests. Tiffany grabbed Harry's arm as he stepped closer to the door. Dad, please, we can work this out. Harry was wrong to talk to you that way. We both were. But you can't just abandon us with no warning, no discussion. You gave me an ultimatum, I reminded her. Do what Harry says or get out. Those were your exact words. I didn't expect you to choose option 2. Harry tried a different approach, his voice artificially calm. Look, we all said things we didn't mean, but you're talking about our home, our credit, our entire future. You can't just pull the rug out like this. I can, and I did. I started to close the door. You wanted me to leave. I left. You wanted to handle your own lives. Now you can. Dad, wait. Tiffany's voice broke completely. What about family? What about everything we've been through together? I paused, looking at her desperate face. For a moment I remembered the little girl who used to help me rake leaves in the fall, who brought me dandelions she'd picked from the yard like they were roses. But that little girl had grown into a woman who could stand by while her husband humiliated her father in his own living room. Family works both ways, sweetheart, I said quietly. I spent 5 years taking care of you both. When it was time for you to take care of me, you chose him instead. Harry's fake composure cracked like old paint. You crazy old bastard. You can't just... I can call the police if you keep raising your voice, I interrupted. This is private property, and you're disturbing the peace. They stared at me, probably seeing me clearly for the first time in years. Not the soft-hearted father and grandfather-to-be, not the convenient bank account with legs, just a man who'd finally learned to say no. Harry grabbed Tiffany's elbow. Come on, we'll figure this out ourselves. They walked back to their car, Harry's swagger replaced by worried hunching, Tiffany looking back over her shoulder like she was seeing a stranger. I watched them drive away, then closed the door and returned to my laptop. There were still calls to make, still accounts to close. The work of dismantling a relationship was far from finished. Word travels at the speed of light in a town like Kalispell. By the end of the week, I realized it was time to control the narrative before it controlled me. My first encounter happened at the post office, where Mrs. Henderson from the church mailing committee cornered me near the stamp machine. She was one of those women who collected information like others collected vintage coins, always ready to display what she'd acquired. Clark, dear, I've been hearing troubling rumors about family difficulties. Is everything quite all right? I considered my response carefully. Mrs. Henderson would repeat whatever I said to at least a dozen people by Sunday service. Tiffany and Harry asked me to move out, so I did. Sometimes adult children need to learn to handle their own responsibilities. Her eyebrows rose like helium balloons. They asked you to leave your own house? It seemed like the best solution for everyone involved. But didn't you pay for their wedding? And help with the down payment? She leaned closer, lowering her voice conspiratorially. I always wondered how they could afford that house on Harry's salary alone. I nodded, but didn't elaborate. The facts would speak for themselves. My next stop was Miller's Hardware, where I'd worked part-time after retiring from the bank. Tom Kowalski, the owner, looked up from his inventory sheets with genuine concern etched across his weathered face. "Clark, heard you're staying out at Pine Lodge. What's going on?" 3 other employees gathered around as I explained the situation. Their reactions were immediate and unanimous. Shock that Harry had treated me so disrespectfully. Anger that I'd been supporting them financially for years without recognition. "You paid for her college tuition?" Dave, the assistant manager, shook his head in disbelief. "Harry told everyone his family was well off. Said they were helping you with mortgage payments. Harry said a lot of things that weren't true," I replied calmly. Tom's expression darkened like storm clouds. "That explains why he always seemed to have money but never worked overtime. We offered him extra shifts plenty of times, but he always had other commitments." "Those commitments were probably at the casino," muttered Sarah from the paint counter. By the time I left the hardware store, I knew the real story would be all over town within hours. Kalispell's small-town network was more efficient than any advertising campaign. I should have expected them to fight back. Harry never was one to surrender quietly. Saturday morning started peacefully enough. I was reviewing bank statements over coffee when my phone began ringing like a fire alarm. First Tom from the hardware store, then Mrs. Henderson, then Pastor Williams. Each call brought the same disturbing news. Harry was making rounds through town, spreading an alternative version of events that painted me as the villain in our family drama. "Clark, I think you need to know what he's saying." Tom's voice carried barely controlled fury. "He came in here about an hour ago, loud as you please, telling everyone you abandoned them without warning. Claims you promised to always take care of them, then changed your mind out of spite." "What exactly did he say?" "That you're having some kind of mental breakdown. Said you threw them out because Tiffany wouldn't let you control every decision in their lives." Tom paused. "He's also claiming there's a family medical emergency that requires money, and you're refusing to help out of pure vindictiveness." I thanked Tom and hung up, my mind already working through the implications. Harry was desperate enough to launch a public relations campaign, which meant the pressure from his creditors was intensifying faster than I'd anticipated. The next call confirmed my suspicions. "Mr. Miller, this is Detective Morrison. I wanted to give you a heads up. Harry Thompson was here this morning filing a complaint about elder abuse. Claims you're being manipulated by someone at the bank to make bad financial decisions." Elder abuse. The accusation was so absurd it was almost funny. "Complete nonsense, of course," Morrison continued. "But he's trying to create an official record of your supposed mental incompetence. I told him we'd need medical documentation and witness statements, which he obviously can't provide." 20 minutes later, my phone rang again. Tiffany's number. "Dad, please pick up. I know you're angry, but there are things you don't understand." Her voice was thick with tears that sounded almost genuine. "I'm pregnant, Dad. The stress from all this is making me sick. The doctor says if things don't calm down soon, I could lose the baby." I felt that familiar twist in my stomach. The same protective instinct that had made me vulnerable to their manipulation for years. But something in her tone seemed rehearsed, desperate in a calculated way. "Congratulations on the pregnancy, sweetheart. When did you find out?" "Last week, right before everything fell apart." Her voice broke convincingly. "Dad, I can't lose my baby because of money problems. You always said family comes first." "Family does come first. That's why I spent $160,000 on your education and $25,000 on your wedding. But what about now? What about your grandchild?" The question hung in the air like smoke. If she was really pregnant, if there was really a medical crisis, then my actions could have unintended consequences. But the timing seemed too convenient, the emotional manipulation too practiced. "Tiffany, have you seen a doctor about these pregnancy complications?" A pause. "I have an appointment next week." "Which doctor?" "Dr. Richards at the women's clinic." I knew Dr. Richards. Martha had seen her for years. "I'll call her office to see how I can help with medical expenses." Dad, you don't need to call. If there's a genuine medical emergency involving my grandchild, I want to help. Dr. Richards will know the best way to handle things. Tiffany's voice became sharp as a razor. You can't just call my doctor, that's private information. You're right. You can have her call me directly to discuss payment options. The call ended abruptly. An hour later, I was walking downtown when I encountered Harry outside the First National Bank. He was talking loudly to anyone who would listen, his voice carrying that aggressive edge I'd learned to recognize as dangerous. He's lost his mind, Harry was saying to a small crowd of Saturday shoppers. Senile old man thinks everyone's trying to steal from him. Kicked his own pregnant daughter out of the house over absolutely nothing. I approached calmly, and the crowd noticed me before Harry did. Faces turned in my direction, expressions shifting as they recognized the subject of Harry's public character assassination. Harry spun around, his face flushing the color of a ripe tomato. There he is, the man who abandoned his own family. Hello, Harry. I kept my voice level, conversational. How's the gambling debt situation working out? The accusation hit him like a physical blow. Several people in the crowd murmured among themselves, pieces of a puzzle clicking into place in their minds. You're crazy, Harry sputtered. I don't know what you're talking about. $18,000 according to Detective Morrison. Glacier Peaks Casino, mostly poker tables. I looked at the gathering crowd. Amazing how much money someone can lose when they're not paying their own living expenses. Harry's face went from red to purple. He stepped closer, using his height advantage like a weapon. You senile old bastard, you can't just... I can document every dollar I've spent supporting you for 5 years, I interrupted calmly. Can you document where your paychecks actually went? The crowd was listening intently now, processing this new information like computers analyzing data. Harry realized he'd lost control of the narrative completely. Come on, he growled, pushing through the crowd like an angry bull. This isn't over, Clark. I watched him storm away, noting how several people pulled out their phones immediately. The real story would be all over social media within the hour. Harry's public threats had crossed a line I couldn't ignore. I walked straight from the bank confrontation to the police station, where Detective Morrison was waiting with the kind of expression that suggested he'd been expecting my visit. Clark, we need to talk. Harry's behavior today showed a pattern of escalation that concerns me professionally. How so? Public confrontation, threatening gestures in front of witnesses, and his whole demeanor suggests someone losing control rapidly. Morrison leaned back in his chair. I'd like you to consider filing a formal complaint and exploring protection options. What kind of protection? Restraining order, for starters. Based on what I witnessed today, combined with his desperate financial situation, Harry's becoming unpredictable. Before I could respond, Steve Brennan, the Pine Lodge night manager, appeared in the doorway. Detective Morrison? Sorry to interrupt, but I thought Mr. Miller should know. That man who was yelling in our parking lot earlier came back about 20 minutes ago, stood outside Mr. Miller's door for maybe 5 minutes, then left. Made some guests nervous. Steve was a retired Army sergeant who'd seen enough trouble to recognize it developing. Did he say anything specific? Muttered something about teaching old fools lessons they'd never forget. I've got it on security video if you need it. Security footage. Physical evidence of Harry's threatening behavior on private property. Steve, would you be willing to provide that footage to the police? Absolutely. A guy like that shouldn't be intimidating elderly residents. The next morning, I arrived at the police station with Steve's security USB drive and a written timeline of Harry's escalating behavior. Detective Morrison reviewed everything with professional thoroughness. Clark, this shows a clear pattern of intimidation. Combined with what I witnessed yesterday at the bank, we have solid grounds for a restraining order. What would that involve? Legal prohibition against Harry coming within 500 feet of you or your property. Violation means immediate arrest, no questions asked. Morrison leaned forward. There's something else you should know. Harry consulted with a lawyer Friday about adverse possession laws. The words hit me like ice water. Squatters' rights. Exactly. He was researching whether he could claim legal ownership of your house based on living there continuously. Morrison's expression was grim. Montana requires 5 years of hostile occupation for adverse possession. They've been there 3 years. The implications staggered me. Harry hadn't just been freeloading. He'd been executing a long-term plan to steal my family home through legal technicalities. Does he have any legitimate claim? None whatsoever. Adverse possession requires hostile occupation without the owner's permission. Since you gave them permission to live there and they never paid rent or property taxes, there's no legal basis. Morrison pulled out a file folder. But it shows premeditation. He's been planning this theft for years. That afternoon, Judge Morrison signed my restraining order. Harry Thompson was now legally prohibited from coming within 500 feet of me or my property. Violation would result in immediate arrest and possible jail time. I drove back to Pine Lodge feeling the satisfaction of justice properly applied. Harry had spent 3 years planning to steal my home. Now he couldn't even approach it legally. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "This isn't over, old man." I forwarded the message to Detective Morrison, then blocked the number. Evidence collection had become second nature. Monday morning, the courthouse clerk stamped the final copy of my restraining order. By noon, I was watching Harry's world collapse from multiple directions simultaneously. "Mr. Miller, this order is effective immediately," the clerk said with efficient authority. "Any contact or approach within 500 feet constitutes a violation." My phone was already ringing as I walked to my car. "Clark, this is Mike Brennan from Mountain View Auto." Mike was Harry's boss, a decent man who'd built his dealership on reputation and trust in a small community. "I need to ask you something directly. Are the things Harry's been saying about you true?" "What has he been saying?" "That you had some kind of breakdown and threw him out because of dementia. That there's a family medical emergency and you're refusing to help." Mike's voice carried skepticism. "Thing is, Clark, I've known you for 20 years. This doesn't sound like the man who co-signed my son's first car loan when nobody else would." "Mike, Harry gave me an ultimatum to obey his orders or leave my own house. I chose to leave. There's no medical emergency, and my mental faculties are fine, as my banker, lawyer, and police detective can confirm." A long pause. "I was afraid of that." "Mike?" "Clark, I've got 3 customers today who mentioned Harry owing them money. One recognized him from the casino. This kind of controversy is affecting my business reputation." "I understand. I'm going to have to let him go. Can't have this kind of situation around customers who trust us with major purchases." 20 minutes later, I was having coffee at Annie's when I saw the first debt collector pull up to my former house. Continental Credit Recovery, based on the magnetic door sign. I'd spoken with them Friday about Harry's false address claims. My phone rang. Tiffany's number. "Dad, there are men at the house asking about Harry's debts. They want to know about our assets, our income, everything." Her voice carried genuine panic now. "What did you tell them?" "I told them the truth. That Harry doesn't own the property and no longer lives there. But they're talking about garnishing wages, seizing assets. Dad, I don't understand any of this. Sweetheart, that's what happens when someone borrows money they can't repay. Those are consequences Harry created, not me. He owes $18,000. How is that even possible?" So she really hadn't known the full extent. Gambling debts. Glacier Peaks Casino, according to Detective Morrison. Silence on the line, then quietly. "He told me he was working overtime those nights." "I'm sorry you're learning about it this way, Tiffany. The sheriff's deputy was here too. Served Harry some kind of legal papers. He's been ranting and throwing things ever since." The restraining order. Harry was probably just realizing that his options had evaporated completely. "Dad, he's talking about leaving town. Says there's nothing left here for him." Her voice cracked like thin ice. "What am I supposed to do?" "Make decisions based on who Harry really is, not who you hoped he was." 2 days of watching their desperation was enough. I called Tiffany Wednesday morning and told her to meet me at the diner. Just her, alone. I can't leave Harry alone right now, Dad. He's really struggling with everything that's happening. Then we have nothing to discuss. The restraining order means I can't be around him anyway. A long pause. Where do you want to meet? Main Street Diner, 2 odd p.m., back corner booth where we can talk privately. I arrived early and chose the booth facing away from the street. I wanted this conversation to focus on words, not worried glances at passing cars. When Tiffany arrived, she looked older than her 28 years. Stress lines around her eyes, nervous fidgeting with her purse strap. She slid into the opposite seat and immediately started talking. Dad, I know you're angry, but Harry's lost his job, and these debt collectors won't leave us alone. The phone rings constantly. People are showing up at the door demanding money we don't have. I waited until she finished, then spoke calmly. I'm offering you one chance to end this situation with some dignity remaining, Tiffany. What do you mean? Public acknowledgement of the truth, full disclosure of how much I've supported you both, and an honest explanation of why I left. Her face flushed red. You want me to humiliate myself in front of the whole town? I want you to tell the truth. There's a significant difference. What kind of acknowledgement? I'd spent 2 days thinking through exactly what justice required. Church announcement Sunday during testimony time, letter to the editor of the Tribune, Facebook post visible to all our mutual connections, full details about college tuition, wedding costs, mortgage payments, and the ultimatum that caused me to leave. Dad, people will think you had a father who loved you enough to sacrifice his retirement security for your happiness, and that you took it for granted until it was gone. Tiffany stared at her untouched coffee. What about Harry? Harry is no longer part of any equation involving me. The restraining order is permanent. If you choose to stay married to him, that's your decision. But it means choosing him over any relationship with me. You're asking me to choose between my husband and my father. I'm asking you to choose between a man who threatened me and a man who raised you. The fact that you see those as equivalent choices tells me everything about how far we've drifted apart. She was quiet for a long moment, processing the implications. What about the house? It's been in our family for generations. It's going to the Montana Veterans Housing Initiative. 3 families of veterans will live there, people who understand what service and sacrifice actually mean. The words hit her like a physical blow. The will's already changed, witnessed, signed, and filed with my attorney. I kept my voice gentle but firm. Even if you do everything I've asked perfectly, the house won't come back to you. That decision is final. Why? Because I need to know that any reconciliation between us is based on love, not inheritance expectations. For 5 years, you treated me like a convenient funding source. I want to see if there's anything left between us beyond financial dependency. Tiffany's eyes filled with tears. Real ones this time, not the calculated manipulation I'd grown accustomed to recognizing. I'm sorry, Dad, I really am. I never meant for things to go this far. Sorry isn't enough anymore, sweetheart. The whole town watched you and Harry treat me like a servant in my own home. They watched you choose his demands over my dignity. Words are just words now. I need to see actions. What if I can't do it? What if I can't stand up in front of everyone and admit how wrong we were? Then you'll live with the consequences of that choice. Harry will probably leave town to escape his creditors. Men like him always run when things get difficult. You can go with him and start over somewhere else, or you can stay here and try to rebuild your life with honesty. And if I do what you're asking, then maybe over time we can build a real relationship, not based on money or guilt or obligation, but on mutual respect between 2 adults. Tiffany wiped her eyes with a napkin. How long do I have to decide? Sunday morning. Church starts at 10 a.m. If you're not there to tell the truth, I'll know you've made your choice. She stood slowly, looking older and more fragile than when she'd arrived. Dad, do you think you could ever forgive me? I looked at my daughter, really looked at her. and saw glimpses of the little girl who used to braid dandelions into crowns and demand bedtime stories about brave princesses. Forgiveness and trust are different things, Tiffany. I forgave you the day I decided to leave rather than fight. But trust has to be earned back, one honest action at a time. She nodded and walked toward the door, shoulders bent under the weight of a decision that would determine the rest of her life. I remained in the booth, watching her drive away. Sunday was 4 days away. By then, I would know whether my daughter had the courage to choose truth over comfort, responsibility over loyalty to someone who had never deserved it. Sunday morning arrived clear and cold, with that crystalline mountain air that made everything seem sharper, more defined. I walked into St. Mark's Lutheran Church, wondering if Tiffany would find the courage to tell the truth. The sanctuary was fuller than usual. Word had gotten around about some kind of family announcement. I took my regular pew 3 rows from the front and waited, feeling the weight of dozens of curious eyes. Pastor Williams began the service with familiar hymns and readings, but I could feel the congregation's anticipative energy crackling like electricity before a storm. When testimony time came, Tiffany stood from the back row. She looked small walking down the center aisle, but her steps were steady. At the podium, she gripped the edges with white knuckles and looked out at faces she'd known her entire life. I need to tell you all something important about my father. Her voice carried clearly through the silent sanctuary. For the past 5 years, Clark Miller has been supporting my husband and me financially. He paid $160,000 for my college education when I could have gone to a state school for a fraction of that cost. He paid $25,000 for my wedding when Harry's family couldn't afford their share. Murmurs rippled through the congregation like wind through wheat. These were specific numbers, documented sacrifices that painted a crystal-clear picture. He gave us his family home, the house his parents left him where he'd lived with my mother for 20 years. When we couldn't make mortgage payments, he paid them. When we needed groceries, utilities, car insurance, he paid for everything while living on Social Security. Her voice strengthened as she continued. 3 weeks ago, when my father wouldn't follow my husband's orders like a servant, we gave him an ultimatum: obey Harry or leave his own house. Dad chose to leave rather than surrender his dignity. The sanctuary was completely silent now. Even the children seemed to sense the gravity of her words. I stood by and watched my husband disrespect the man who sacrificed his retirement security for our comfort. I chose loyalty to someone who threatened my father over loyalty to the man who raised me with love and patience. Tears flowed freely now, but her voice remained clear and strong. I'm standing here because my father offered me one last chance to choose truth over pride. I was wrong. Harry was wrong. My father deserved gratitude and respect, and instead we gave him ultimatums and demands. She looked directly at me. Dad, I'm sorry isn't enough for what we put you through, but I'm hoping it's a start. The congregation erupted in supportive murmurs as Tiffany returned to her seat. Pastor Williams approached the podium with tears in his own eyes. Sometimes the hardest courage is admitting our mistakes publicly. Tiffany has shown that courage today, and her father has shown us what dignity looks like under pressure. After the service, people approached me with embraces, handshakes, and words of support that felt like warm sunlight after a long winter. Mrs. Henderson squeezed my hand tightly. We all suspected you were helping them financially, Clark. What we didn't know was how they repaid your kindness. Tom from the hardware store clapped my shoulder. That took real character, what you did. Setting boundaries isn't easy when family's involved. But the most meaningful moment came when Tiffany approached me outside the church, her face still streaked with tears but somehow looking cleaner, lighter. The letter to the Tribune will run Wednesday. The Facebook post goes live tonight. She hesitated. Harry left town yesterday, packed his truck while I was at work and disappeared. No forwarding address, no note, nothing. I wasn't surprised. Men like Harry always ran when confronted with consequences they couldn't manipulate or avoid. I'm sorry your marriage ended this way. I'm not, she said quietly. I filed for divorce this morning. Found out he'd been using my credit cards for gambling without telling me. The debts are worse than we thought. 6 months later, I stood in the front yard of my former family home, watching 3 veteran families move into the transitional housing units the Montana Veterans Housing Initiative had created. The house had been renovated into separate apartments, each family getting privacy while sharing common areas and support services. Staff Sergeant Maria Santos recently returned from deployment, directed her 2 children toward the playground equipment donated by local businesses. Mr. Miller, this opportunity means everything to us. Thank you for choosing veterans for this gift. Veterans understand sacrifice, I replied, watching her kids discover the swing set. This house should serve people who've actually earned it. My own life had settled into peaceful routines at the lakeside cabin I'd purchased with money no longer flowing to ungrateful dependents. Morning coffee on the deck overlooking Flathead Lake. Afternoon fishing when the mood struck. Evening reading by the fireplace Martha and I had dreamed of having someday. Simple pleasures that felt luxurious after years of financial stress and family drama. The cabin was small but perfectly suited to my needs. 2 bedrooms, a kitchen where I could cook actual meals instead of eating restaurant food constantly, and a dock where I could launch my small fishing boat whenever I wanted. My phone buzzed with a text from Tiffany. Dad, I'm 6 months into counseling and learning a lot about healthy relationships. Could we try having coffee sometime? I'd like to earn your trust back, one conversation at a time. I smiled, looking out at the lake where an osprey was fishing in the shallows with patient precision. Tiffany had kept her word about the public acknowledgments. The newspaper letter had been thorough and honest. The Facebook post had generated dozens of supportive comments from community members who finally understood the real story. More importantly, she was taking responsibility for rebuilding our relationship instead of expecting forgiveness without effort. I typed back, "Coffee sounds good. Saturday morning at the diner." Her response came immediately, "I'll be there. And Dad, thank you for not giving up on me completely." I set the phone aside and watched the osprey rise from the water with a fish in its talons. Patient persistence rewarded with success. Sometimes patience and dignity were rewarded, even when the wait seemed endless. The sun was setting over the Rockies, painting the lake surface gold and orange like a masterpiece. In the distance, I could hear children laughing at the Veterans Housing Complex, families building new lives in the home where I'd learned the difference between generosity and enabling. Justice served, dignity preserved, and maybe, just maybe, a daughter ready to earn back her father's trust through honest effort rather than emotional manipulation. It had been worth every difficult moment of the wait. If this story moved you, please hit that like button, subscribe to our channel for more powerful family stories, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever had to choose between family loyalty and self-respect? Let us know how you handled it. To watch our next incredible story about standing up for yourself, click the video on your screen now. Thank you for watching, and remember, sometimes the most loving thing you can do is let people face the consequences of their choices.